Why hello there. So, just because of the way things work, I covered the most recent playtest packet in 4 videos, mainly to get the content out as quickly as possible, because algorithms. But now that they are all done and posted, I figured I might as well put everything together into one video with a little bit of additional commentary for the people who prefer comprehensive to immediate for their Dungeon and Dragon video experience. So now, on to the One D&D Dungeon and Dragon Expert Classes playtest materials. So the new playtest materials covers the Expert Classes. So right off the bat, there is something that I like here. They have grouped the classes into, well, groups, which is an idea that I like. I liked it in 2nd edition, I liked it in 4th edition, even though it didn't really work out that great there, and I like it here. And it is going to be a mechanical thing, not just strictly thematic. Several of the feats presented in this playtest packet have class groups as a prerequisite, and they say that magic items may work in a similar way. So I like what's going on there. It's a small detail, but a structural one that I like. I like them, making things a bit more uniform, saying these are the expert classes and they have these feats, these are the warrior classes and they have these feats. Maybe this feat is for warriors and experts. It's a neat little thing that I like personally. Anyway, as stated, this playtest packet features the expert classes, which are the more skill-based type classes, specifically the Bard, the Ranger, and the Rogue. And in this first video, I'll be taking a look at the Bard, everyone's favorite class, or, everyone who matters at least. And I believe I make no secret of the fact that I don't particularly like the 5th edition Bard. They took out a lot of the performance-based aspects of the class, and then just kind of gave them more spells, which makes them feel like a generic spellcaster. And, maybe they fixed those issues here. Spoiler, they actually made them worse. Anyway, now to dissect some pre-release materials. The Bard's hit dice, saving throws, skills, and light armor proficiency remain unchanged, and they are now only proficient with simple weapons, having lost proficiency in the hand crossbow, rapier, and longsword. The short sword has been reclassified as a simple weapon, so they are still proficient in that. Hypothetically, the hand crossbow and other things could have been reclassified, but the short sword is the only one that is specified in this book, so it's the only one that I know for sure. And personally, I'm still a little salty about them losing proficiency in the whip, so obviously, I'm not thrilled about them losing proficiency in the rapier, too. The Bard is kind of a weird class, and getting these extra weapon proficiencies really fit in with the Bard's eclectic nature and makes them feel even more distinctive. Or, it did. And you may remember from my previous videos that I was somewhat withholding my opinion on the removal of racial weapon proficiencies until we found out how weapon proficiencies are going to work in, Dungeon and Dragon. And I guess now we know they're going to work the same, but worse, so I can confidently say, bring back racial weapon proficiencies. Now, moving on to first level abilities, Bards retain their near wizard level spellcasting, but it does work a bit differently. Bards now have access to every divination, enchantment, illusion, and transmutation spell from the arcane spell list, which does add some spells and lose some spells, but I'm not going to compare every single item on both lists to determine if it is a net gain or a net loss. And spells known are now gone. Basically, now every day you can prepare your spells, but, not in the bad way. Basically, now you prepare a number of spells per day equal to your spell slots of each level, and then that is your spell list from which you can cast spontaneously. And I'm not really sure how I feel about this one. Honestly, I hate preparing spells, but preparing a spell list that you can then cast from however you want is not nearly as bad as having to prepare each spell individually. Also, having access to like around half of the arcane spell list, it's not going to be like that complicated, but it does feel like while you're looking through the spells, checking for each school, you are going to start asking yourself, wouldn't it just be easier to have a bard spell list? Anyway, moving on. I don't think I've ever really mentioned this, but I kinda hate bardic inspiration. It's not like horrible or anything, but what it is a replacement for bardic performance, which was a bard class feature that I really liked. Like, it was the key feature of the 3rd edition / Pathfinder Bard. So bardic inspiration is kind of like the Esri Dax of class features. It's not bad, it's, fine on its own, but it just kind of reminds you of a much better thing that it replaced. Anyway, bardic inspiration has been changed a little bit. It is now a reaction to a creature failing a D20 test. I still hate that term. And then the bardic inspiration die is added to the roll just as it is in 5th edition. Also can be used as a reaction to a creature taking damage to heal them a number of hit points equal to the bardic inspiration die. And I kinda like this. The healing version, isn't spectacular, but it is an acceptable form of like emergency healing. And also changing from a here's a bonus that you might need at some point in the next 10 minutes to a here's a bonus that you can use right now when you need it, seems like it makes the bardic inspiration quite a bit more useful. Also, just the whole thing where you hand out a bardic inspiration ahead of time always felt really weird to me thematically. Also, just in general, bardic inspiration is, and always has been, really weird thematically. Like, bardic performance is an ongoing bonus while you are performing. Essentially, your allies are there and they see you doing a crazy dance in the middle of the battlefield and they're like, that crazy bastard, and it inspires them to fight even harder. But thematically, standard bardic inspiration is just, you can inspire others through stirring words and music. Which, thematically does sound the same, but then it doesn't make sense in practice. So instead of performing and your allies, getting a bonus during the performance, like, you play a flute solo and one ally of yours sees the flute solo and it's like, I'm feeling mildly inspired, but like not really inspired, because they don't get really inspired until such time as they're just, I guess, later it's a delayed inspiration and they're like overcome with the beauty of your music, and then it gives them a bonus when they decide to use it. It's a thing that really feels like, I don't know, someone thought that it was a much better version of bardic performance mechanically, and then they just couldn't think of a way for it to make sense thematically, so they just didn't try. And the new version is basically the same, once again, thematically. The description text says, you can supernaturally inspire others through words, music, or dance. But now it's possibly even weirder in practice because you somehow initiate a performance which then retroactively makes the target have been inspired while performing the action that they failed. And just overall, new or old, bardic inspiration makes zero sense from any perspective other than mechanically. And, just throwing this out here because I probably am going to have to, there is more to a class than just its unbranded mechanics. So, in my opinion, a better version of bardic inspiration. Personally, I would rather have a better version of bardic performance, but, I guess we have to take what we can get. Also, the uses are now limited to your proficiency bonus instead of your charisma modifier. And the font of inspiration, which recharges that on a short rest instead of a long rest, has been moved from 5th level to 7th. And this is a very depends on how high your charisma modifier is thing. Because if you have a +5 charisma modifier, the 5th edition version is much better. because you start with 5 uses per day. Sure, you don't ever get to 6 uses per day, but you start with 5. Whereas if you had a +2, you would start at 2 and stay at 2 unless you increased your charisma, which you probably would do with all of your ability score increases until you got to 5. At the new way, you would start at 2 either way, but then you'd go up to 3 at 5th level, and then 4, 5, and 6. So, it's a hard thing to say which is better. Personally, I would say the new one is a little bit better. I like the features that go up, that you start with 2 and then it goes up to 3, 4, 5, instead of having to start with this really high charisma in order for the ability to be useful. I'm not incredibly fond of any type of abilities or mechanics that really push you to hyper-specialize your character. Like, a character should be fine without a +5 bonus in anything. Jack of all trades has been bumped from 2nd level to 5th, but otherwise remains the same, and expertise has been moved from 3rd and 10th level to 2nd and 9th. It still functions the same, giving you double your proficiency bonus on 2 skills, but that double proficiency bonus is now called expertise. And that's a thing that I'm somewhat conflicted on, because I'm not entirely sure how much that new term needed to be defined, because saying double your proficiency on a skill is not that many more words than saying expertise on a skill. And then also, if you don't know what expertise is, you might need to look that up, like I did in this playtest document. Song of Rest has been replaced with Songs of Restoration, which basically just gives you additional divine spells as special spells that do not use your daily spell preparation slots. And on one hand, it is a thing that is a way to still give the bards the healing spells that they traditionally have had, and you would not get with the new, 3 spell list system. But on the other hand, it gets rid of Song of Rest, which is one of the bard's few remaining performance-based abilities. And it just kind of feels like it is cutting a feature, Song of Rest, as a patch for another cut feature, individual class spell lists. The bardic colleges are now called subclasses. I don't know if that's a thing they're doing here just for convenience, or if that is an overall change. I like the idea of it being an overall change just because every class has subclasses and they just kind of call them different things, and why not just call them the same thing? And the subclass now gives a benefit at 10th level in addition to 3rd, 6th, and 14th. The only subclass provided is the College of Lore, so I guess let's go over the College of Lore. At 3rd level, you get Cutting Words, which has been updated to be consistent with the new version of Bardic Inspiration, so now it triggers when the opponent succeeds on their attack or skill check, rather than when they make the roll. At 6th level, Additional Magic Secrets has been replaced with Cunning Inspiration, probably because they changed the way that spell lists work, which allows you to roll the Bardic Inspiration dice twice and take the higher result. And I just need to question why they felt that D20 test was a necessary term to add to the game, but they can't just say that any time you roll 2 dice and take the highest result, it is advantage. At 10th level, you get Improved Cutting Words, which allows you to deal damage equal to your Bardic Inspiration die plus Charisma modifier to the target of your cutting words. And at 14th level, Peerless Skill remains mostly the same, the only difference being that if you do not pass the check after adding the Bardic Inspiration die, the use of Bardic Inspiration is not expended. Probably because the way that it originally worked is now like the default Bardic Inspiration. The ability score adjustments at levels 4, 8, 12, 16, and 19 have been replaced with feats, although you could just take the ability score increase feat, so I'm pretty sure that it is basically the same as the alternate feat rules for 5th edition. Counter Charm is gone, no replacement, so that is the last of the bard's performance-based abilities. Magical Secrets has been moved from level 10 to 11, and instead of giving you 2 spells from a different spell list, just gives you a whole ass spell list. And then you can prepare a maximum of 2 spells from the new spell list per day in your spell preparation slots. And then at level 15, you get another spell list. So the Bard can get access to quite a lot of spells, and you can also take the arcane spell list, which you already have, to get those arcane spells that you were not able to have access to because of the school restrictions. And like, yeah, it's cool to get more spells and all, but man, that is a lot of spells, and I feel like it could be a little overwhelming. And also, the ability to take the entire Divine spell list makes Songs of Restoration feel even less impressive. And also, why not just give them a third Magical Secrets and let them have access to every spell list? It would be at level 19, and at that point, why not just let the Bard have access to every single spell? That was a rhetorical question. Please do not write me a 1,000-word essay in the comments on why you think that the Bard should not have access to every spell. I don't care. No one cares. Superior Bardic Inspiration has been moved from level 20 to 18, and now replenishes 2 uses of Bardic Inspiration when you roll initiative, regardless of whether or not all of your uses have been expended. And of course that was moved to make room for the Epic Boon at level 20, which is a new category of comically powerful feats. For now, I will just mention the Epic Boon which is suggested for the Bard, which is the Epic Boon of Luck, and allows you to add a D10 to a D20 test. And then that recharges when you take a short rest, long rest, or a roll initiative, so you're always going to have that for every encounter at a minimum. And these really high-level abilities can be very difficult to judge because most games never get anywhere near that level. And honestly, I feel like at that point, you're just kind of expecting that everything, both in terms of monster abilities and player abilities, are going to be overpowered. So these comically overpowered feats don't seem that bad, but it's hard to imagine actually using them in context. And that was the Dungeon and Dragon Bard. There are things here that I like better than 5th edition, and there are things here that I like worse than 5th edition. And, quite a few things that I like worse than Pathfinder. But that is not what we're talking about today. The changes to the spellcasting are very different. I'm not sure if it's good or bad. That's the kind of different it is. On one hand, having the ability to make your spell list every day from every available spell seems like it could be a little overwhelming, but also you can do that. That's the thing, is if you want to, you can still not do that, but it is now an option that is available if you want it. And it does seem like this is how magic is overall going to work in Dungeon and Dragon, but won't know for sure until we get the playtest on the arcane classes. The changes made to Bardic Inspiration, and at least the one subclass that they included, were overall pretty good. I like them over the 5th edition versions of those things. Of course, as I said, Bardic Inspiration is an ability that I was never really thrilled with in the first place, but these changes make it feel a bit more useful and a bit less weird. But then there's the other things like the loss of Counter Charm and Song of Rest, which have completely stripped the Bard of their performance-based abilities. And oh, but their spells are performance-based. No, they are not. The spells are a generic ability in Dungeon and Dragon. Just offhandedly mentioning that the Bard's spells are infused into their performance does not make it a unique performance-based feature of the Bard. It's just regular, generic spellcasting. Overall, it just kind of feels like they're taking the Bard further in the direction that they took it with 5th edition, and that's not really a direction that I was ever very happy with. So overall, I don't know, maybe it's a slightly better version of the 5th edition Bard, but the 5th edition Bard, isn't that great to begin with. Alright, so that was the Bard, and up next we have the Ranger. A class that I have never played because, honestly, they kind of seem like a combination of the okayest aspects of a druid and a fighter. Anyway, my personal indifference aside, let's get into the Dungeon and Dragon Ranger. The Ranger's hit dice, saves, skills, weapons, and armor proficiency remain unchanged. And the first and most notable thing, their spells now start at level 1. They don't, get any more spells or anything. They didn't, bump all the spells up one level. They just took the spells that you get at level 2, and you get them at level 1 instead. But from that point, it progresses the same as in 5th edition. The Ranger gets access to the entire primal spell list, excluding evocation spells. And I don't particularly like this. It's not like getting the spells a level early is a big deal. Of course, it's also not like getting the spells a level later is a big deal. The thing is, I don't like why they did it, because they did it for a very specific reason that is kind of a big deal. A very specific reason, like favored enemy, which now, instead of choosing a creature type and getting bonuses to skill checks related to creatures of that type, you get Hunter's Mark as a bonus prepared spell. Not a bonus spell, like you don't get any extra castings of it, just an extra spell that you always have prepared in addition to your normal limit of prepared spells. The only other noteworthy thing being that it no longer requires concentration when you use it. And boy howdy do I have opinions on this, but I'm going to hold those for now because I don't want to have to repeat myself later. Rangers also get expertise in 2 skills at first level, which is like the Bard and Rogue feature. You get double proficiency bonus on those 2 specified skills, and is also now a defined term in the game, which I personally find kind of unnecessary, but yeah. And then you do also get that again at 9th level. Also, Natural Explorer is gone. I think the expertise might be a little bit of an attempt to make up for that, but there's no direct anything with favored terrain anymore. Technically, there's no favored enemy anymore because it's just whatever enemy you are attacking, but once again, I'm going to hold my thoughts on that for later. At 2nd level, you still get a fighting style, but they are now once again in the form of bonus feats, because feats are once again a standard part of the game, the options being reduced to archery, defense, and to weapon fighting. No idea why dueling was removed, but it was. At level 3, Primeval Awareness is gone, with no replacement, and you get your subclass, which is the new name for Ranger archetypes. The playtest materials only include the Hunter subclass, so we're gonna look at that. The bonuses have been changed from levels 3, 7, 11, and 15 to 3, 6, 10, and 14, possibly in an attempt to have some more cross-class consistency. At 3rd level, you get Hunter's Prey, which functions kinda like the 5th edition version, except it has been reduced to only the Colossus Slayer option, which gives you an extra d8 damage against creatures that are below maximum hit points. Defensive Tactics has been replaced with Hunter's Lore at level 6, which allows you to automatically know any immunities, resistance, or vulnerabilities of a creature subject to your Hunter's Mark, which, remember, is a non-bonus spell that replaced Favored Enemy. At level 10, Multi-Attack is still technically there, but boy, it is so much worse. Instead of letting you attack all enemies in a 20-foot area or all adjacent enemies, it instead adds Conjure Barrage as a bonus prepared spell. Yes, another ability that literally just gives you a spell that is always prepared. Although you can also cast it as a level 1 or 2 spell with reduced damage. And I will now share my thoughts on this. I don't remember if I actually said this in the first playtest packet video I did, but there is something of a feeling going on that they think spells are just kind of the solution to all of their problems. Like, if they just pile enough spells onto a character, then it will somehow just magically become good game design. And so far, this is the worst example of that. Favorite enemy has been replaced with a spell. Defensive tactics has been removed, and in its place, a modification to that previous spell. Multi-attack has been replaced with a spell. And yeah, there are tiny little class-specific tweaks to those spells, but it is still replacing major class features with generic spells. And keep in mind, these are bonus prepared spells, not bonus uses of these spells, not bonus spells known. Both of those spells are already on the Ranger's spell list. They are just additional spells that you always have prepared, so you really get almost nothing in exchange for those abilities. Anyway, back to actually looking at stuff and not ranting. At level 14, Superior Hunter's Defense is basically the uncanny dodge option from the 5th edition version, but, you know, that is now the only option. And in addition to having the damage from an attack, you can also redirect that half damage to another creature within range. So that's a thing that they made better, provided that that was already the option that you thought was the best one. So overall, they basically just removed all of the options but one from the subclass features, except defensive tactics, which they just removed and replaced with a modified use of a spell. So, not great in general. Anyway, back to the main Ranger abilities. At levels 4, 8, 12, 16, and 19, the ability score improvements have been replaced with feats, including the ability score improvement feat. Although the Ranger does also get special access to the fighting style feats, which are normally only available to classes in the Warrior group. At 5th level, you get an extra attack with the attack action. I guess they couldn't find a spell that they could replace that with, but, you know, I believe in them. I'm sure they'll figure out some way to ruin that by the time the book comes out. At 7th level, you get the roaming ability, which increases your speed by 10 feet and also gives you an equivalent swim and climb speed. So, a new useful ability. But of course, law of equivalent exchange, you lose land stride at level 8 and hide in plain sight at level 10. But then at level 11, there is another new ability, Tireless, which allows you to get 1d8 plus proficiency modifier temporary hit points after a rest, or reduce your fatigue level by 1 after a short rest. And at level 13, another new ability, Nature's Veil, which lets you expend a spell slot to become invisible until the end of your next turn, which, you know, it's a good thing that you don't need those spell slots for using the things that they replaced key Ranger class features with or anything. And then at 14th level, Vanish has also been removed, which, along with Hide in Plain Sight, were the Ranger's camouflage abilities. You know, the ability that it makes the most sense for a Ranger to have. And presumably, Nature's Veil is supposed to be their new camouflage ability, but it just makes you invisible till the end of your next turn, and costs a spell slot. So once again, they are just ripping out features that are thematically central to the Ranger and replacing them with magic. Feral Senses has been moved from level 18 to 15 and now grants Blind Sight 30 instead of basically Blind Sight 30. Foe Slayer has been moved from level 20 to level 18 and you're gonna love this. Instead of allowing you to add your wisdom modifier to attacks or damage against your favorite enemy because you do not have a favorite enemy anymore, it increases the damage bonus from Hunter's Mark from a D6 to a D10. That is your big ultimate class feature, increasing bonus damage from a spell. Okay, technically your ultimate ability is the Epic Boon, which is a new category of overly powerful feats. For now, the recommended Epic Boon for the Ranger is the Epic Boon of Fortitude, which gives you 40 additional hit points and lets you increase all healing received by your Constitution modifier. So, as I said, a quite powerful feat. And that was the Ranger, an unimpressive class which was not done any favors by this redesign. Overall, it feels like they lost much more than they gained, both in terms of abilities that were just removed and abilities that were replaced with something considerably worse. Although, admittedly, some things they only made slightly worse by just taking away all of the options except one. And while they did add things like, roving, that's an okay ability, the things that they removed were like the key class features of the Ranger. Like earlier I joked about seeing the Ranger as basically just a fighter/druid, and that's even more true here. Rangers are supposed to be like masters of their environment, and that is represented with abilities like Favored Enemy, Favored Terrain, and Hide in Plain Sight. Non-magical abilities that represent the Ranger's knowledge and experience with their environment and the creatures that live there. And that's what the Ranger is supposed to be thematically. They are essentially, the woodsman who lives in the woods and knows the woods. They pick up a little magic along the way, but overall, the majority of their abilities are supposed to be skill-based. And those thematically skill-based abilities are the specific ones that were removed. It's almost like they are intentionally removing the key features from each class, but I can't think of any reason why they would want to do that. Okay, maybe I can think of one reason, but it's a bad reason. Obviously, the most egregious thing being the loss of Favored Enemy, because, Hunter's Mark is an okay spell, but it's not a spell that you want to build an entire class around. Because remember, they did not just replace Favored Enemy with Hunter's Mark, they replaced Favored Enemy, Defensive Tactics, and Foe Slayer with some variation of Hunter's Mark. Unfortunately, it's not like there's an easy fix here or anything, especially not, an example in this same playtest packet of a way that this could be fixed, It's not like they could just give you Hunter's Mark as a spell-like ability usable a number of times per day equal to your proficiency bonus, something that would still have your use of it restricted, but also make it usable enough that it would kind of be reasonable to have 2 more abilities that modify it. But now we can't do that. That would just be silly. It's much better to do absolutely nothing. Anyway, that was my deep dive into the Dungeon and Dragon Ranger. And I know it's a little early to call it the worst class redesign of One D&D, but honestly, if they did worse than this, I would be really impressed. They have to do something like replace a barbarian's rage with spellcasting, or make paladins exclusively proficient in crossbows. I mean, admittedly, I'm not saying that those things are outside the realm of possibilities, but it would be impressive. Alright, so that was a thing, but now let's move on to the Rogue, aka the Stabby Boy. The Rogue's hit points, saves, skills, tool, and armor proficiencies remain unchanged, but now instead of being proficient in simple weapons, hand crossbows, longbows, rapiers, and short swords, they are proficient in simple weapons and martial weapons with the finesse property. So overall, they lost proficiency in the longsword, unless it has been made finesse, and hand crossbow, unless it has been made simple, but gain proficiency in the whip, unless it has been made exotic. And that is a big overarching issue with these playtest packets. They only really address content that is in the packet. Like in the glossary, they included an update to the short sword to specify that it is now a simple weapon because there's a short sword in the bard starting equipment. Actually, all 3 characters' starting equipments, but the bard would no longer be proficient with the short sword if not for it being made a simple weapon. And I don't know, maybe other weapons have been changed too. So it's entirely possible that the hand crossbow, which the bard and rogue have lost proficiency in, they haven't actually lost proficiency in because it's now a simple weapon, like a light crossbow. But we don't know that because a hand crossbow was not specifically mentioned, and therefore any updates to it were not included. Anyway, at first level, the rogue still gets expertise, which grants double proficiency bonus on 2 skills, and then you get a second helping of that at 7th level. Sneak attack is exactly the same, 1/2 level d6 added to your damage once per turn when you have advantage or an ally adjacent to the target, although it has been slightly more clearly explained. Thieves' Cant now grants Thieves' Cant and an additional language instead of Thieves' Cant and knowledge of secret signs and symbols, and that's a thing I don't particularly like. Possibly. It is, once again, a thing where it's what is explained and what is not. Because I like the rogues having their own secret roguish hobo code. However, maybe that is still part of Thieves' Cant. We don't have, like, that much of a description of Thieves' Cant in this playtest packet. So I do not know if they have actually lost a feature, or if they've just gained a bonus language, and the thing that I thought was lost is actually just part of the main thing now. At 2nd level, Cunning action remains unchanged. You can use a bonus action to take a dash, disengage, or hide action. And at 3rd level, you get your Rogue subclass, the features from which have mostly been moved up 3 levels, and the only subclass provided in this playtest packet is the Thief, so we're gonna look at the Thief. At 3rd level, Fast Hands now lets you pick a pocket or use the search action, in addition to picking a lock or disarming a trap, but no longer allows you to use an object. And Second Story Work still removes the speed penalty while climbing, although it is now you get a climb speed, and now you get to use your dexterity in place of strength when making a jump check, instead of adding your dexterity modifier in feet to the distance of a jump. And that second one, obviously much better. Supreme Sneak has moved from level 9 to 6, and now grants advantage on stealth checks when you are wearing light or no armor, instead of when you move no more than half your speed. Use Magic Device has been moved from level 13 to 10, and now instead of just letting you use magic items regardless of any class, race, or level restrictions, it allows you to attune to up to 4 magic items at once, gives you a 1 in 6 chance of not expending a charge when using a magic item, and also allows you to use scrolls of 1st level and lower, or, higher with a successful Arcana check. And finally, Thieves' Reflexes has been moved from level 17 to 14, and now instead of giving you an extra action in the first round of combat, it gives you a number of bonus actions equal to your proficiency bonus that can be used for your cunning actions. So overall, the only real major changes were to use Magic Device and Thieves' Reflexes, and I kinda like the changes that were made. Use Magic Device is a bit more powerful, and Thieves' Reflexes is a bit weaker, but overall I like the direction that they're both going in. I really like the idea of a skill-focused rogue, and getting extra actions that you can use for your cunning roguish actions seems like a better bonus than getting an extra turn in the first round of combat, because that only works in the first round of combat, and also doesn't really work out of combat. So it's a lesser bonus, but a bonus that you get more often. Also, moving the feature from level 17 to 14 means that more people are actually going to be able to use the ability, since there is something of a massive drop-off in the number of players who are going to be using the content at, every level after 10. Probably more like 7. And the use magic device, I don't know how restrictive the magic items are going to be with those class, race, and level requirements that they no longer can ignore, but if those have been relaxed, then the rogue, even if they get access to fewer magic items, are going to be able to use the magic items that they have better, and also scrolls. And now back to the main class features. The ability score increases gained at levels 4, 8, 10. The rogue gets an extra one at 10. 12, 16, and 19 have been replaced with feats. Thing that I'm kind of getting tired of saying because I have to say it for every class. At 5th level, Uncanny Dodge remains the same, half damage from an attack as a reaction. Evasion has been moved from level 7 to 9. At level 11, Reliable Talent remains the same, minimum of 10 on an ability roll in which you are proficient. And at level 13, you get the first fully new ability in this rogue redesign, Subtle Strikes, which grants advantage on attack rolls made against enemies who are adjacent to at least one of your allies. So it is a thing that very much piggybacks on the tactics you are going to already be using in order to get your sneak attack. But then in exchange for that, at level 14, Blind Sense is lost. You still get Slippery Mind at level 15, but it now provides proficiency in Wisdom and Charisma saving throws instead of just Wisdom. Elusive has been moved from level 18 to 17, but otherwise remains the same, basically giving you immunity to advantage on attack rolls against you. And Stroke of Luck has been moved from level 20 to 18, which is probably why Elusive was moved to 17, and now lets you treat any failed roll as a 20, not just a skill check, once per interrest period. Then at level 20, you get the Epic Boon. All of the classes get the Epic Boon. The recommended Epic Boon for the Rogue is the Epic Boon of Undetectability, which makes you undetectable by any means, mundane or magical, while you are hidden. So as I keep saying, they are slightly overpowered abilities. That's kind of the idea behind them. And I have thoughts on them, but as I said, next video. And that was the Dungeon & Dragon Rogue. Kind of a shorter video because there just wasn't that much to talk about. Overall, it's like one feature lost, one feature gained, one made moderately better, one made moderately worse, even though personally I kind of thematically and functionally like the worse version of that ability. But overall, there is very little change. Like, in the reveal trailer, when they were saying how, oh, this is not a new edition, it's just a slight refinement of the 5th edition rules we made, which are oh so good, they are the best rules ever, and we're just tooling around, we're not making any major changes. This is what I was expecting. Because here's the thing, when compared to the aggressive slapdash redesign of the Bard and the Ranger, the Rogue kind of feels out of place. Like, it feels like it was either the only class that they actually cared enough to put actual effort into, or the one that they cared least about and thought they were doing a really good job with the Bard and the Ranger. But overall, the Rogue redesign is just kind of mildly good. Like, it's a small net positive, but a net positive nonetheless. As I said earlier, I like the idea of the skill-based Rogue, and things like expanded actions you can perform with fast hands and extra cunning actions with Thieves' Reflexes do lend to that. Personally, I would like to see it pushed even further. Like, not every class needs to be focused entirely around combat. However, I know that some people would very much not like that and would be more than happy if you just got an extra die of sneak attack at every level. Unfortunately, the fact that it's just kind of okay means I don't really have that much to say about it, because the Dungeon & Dragon Rogue is basically just the 5th edition Rogue, and, that was okay, and this is okay. And now I'm going to look at, all the other stuff that's in this thing, because there was more than just those 3 things. So first up, just an overall thing I would like to point out that I liked is when something has been updated now, they are underlining it, which is a convenient way of knowing what has been changed. Because the way they are doing this playtest is suboptimal at best, and a confusing mess at worst. So it is helpful to know what things have been updated. So for example, when a long rest comes up, long rest is underlined, meaning, oh, something has been changed with long rest. I better go to the glossary and look up what's going on. And then you see, oh, long rest now fully restores hit points, spent hit die, ability damage, and lowered maximum hit points. I'm not sure how your hit point maximum would be lowered other than ability damage, but it is listed as like a fourth thing that a long rest restores, so it restores those four things. And I don't really have much of an opinion on that other than, okay, that sounds somewhat convenient that you heal up completely with a long rest instead of, oh, we're just gonna have to spend like 3 days in town or in camp before we continue the adventure so that we can heal up to maximum. Anyway, going forward, I am not going to cover every little thing that has been changed because a lot of things have been changed, just the ones that I think are worth noting. So first up, spells, which are once again just provided in the format of the Arcane, Divine, and Primal spell lists, but they now also include the spell schools, which is relevant for the Bard and Ranger, and some of the spell schools have been changed. Also, they have changed Barkskin, which now grants temporary hit points equal to your spell casting modifier plus proficiency bonus instead of a minimum AC of 16, and Guidance, which is now a reaction, which makes it more in line with the updated version of Bardic Inspiration. And, you know, thematically, I like the change to Barkskin, because, you know, having your skin turn to tough bark like Barkskin does sound like more of a temporary hit point situation, but it also seems like a less good bonus. And Guidance just, you know, seems better. Like, I had the same opinion of the new version of Bardic Inspiration. Having it go off as a reaction to a failure instead of a thing you give someone that they might need later makes it a lot more useful. But now let's move on to feats, about which there are two important things to talk about. The first one being that all of the level 4 and up feats now contain a +1 bonus to a maximum of 20 to one of your ability scores. So, for example, if you take the Crossbow Expert feat, you get a +1 bonus to your Dexterity score. And, you know, some of the feats are a little better, some of them are a little worse. I'm not going to go through all of them because I just don't really want to. But we might as well look at one, so let's return to Crossbow Expert. It still allows you to ignore the reloading property of a crossbow and not suffer disadvantage when firing a crossbow within 5 feet of an enemy. But now, instead of allowing you to make a hand crossbow attack as a bonus action when attacking with a one-handed weapon, it allows you to add your ability modifier to the damage of a hand crossbow attack when two-weapon fighting. Because that is another thing. Two-weapon fighting has kind of been moved to a property of light weapons, which, according to this, seems to include hand crossbows. So, as for the ability score increases, I don't really see them as a huge problem, but I also don't really see them as necessary. And honestly, I kind of, you know, sneakily brought up the light weapon thing because I couldn't think of anywhere else to bring it up in the video. It brings up a very interesting question, which is two-weapon fighting now going to be just a property of light weapons? Like, all light weapons can be used for two-weapon fighting, including hand crossbows. Which also may or may not be simple weapons. That's an ongoing thing that I've been talking about. Because, like, that doesn't make any difference mechanically, but it could signal that they are trying to make weapon properties more significant things. So, as in this example, it could be not that two-weapon fighting allows you to make 2 attacks with light weapons, but rather a light weapon allows you to two-weapon fight. Once again, a very minor change, but one that could be laying the groundwork for more moderate changes. And then, of course, the other big feat-related thing, the Epic Boons, which are 20th level feats that allow you to do things like increase your speed by 30 feet, or gain proficiency in all skills. And honestly, I just don't really like these. Like, they're inoffensive, but also it just kind of feels like a waste of space and design time to have these things that are only going to be used in significantly less than 1% of campaigns. And I really don't like them being feats. Like, if we have to have these, if that is non-negotiable, make them their own thing and put them in their own little dark corner of the book, because even in this playtest packet, it is annoying having to scroll past this epic boons section whenever you're looking at the feats. Especially considering that, as mentioned earlier, the epic boons are only ever going to be used by, honestly, a negligible number of players. But now on to miscellaneous things. So the big one, the big topic of discourse on the tweet box, the D20 test. Notably, the rules for criticals have been removed and just replaced with see the player's handbook for the rules for criticals. Which, as you may remember from the last playtest, was a thing that people were complaining about because the critical rules specified weapon or unarmed strike, which suggested you could not roll a critical on a spell roll, which you shouldn't be able to do anyway, but now they have just removed that section from the playtest materials, maybe to revise it, maybe to not. Also, there's no longer any mention of a 20 being an automatic success, possibly due to all the people online who were crying about how, oh no, if a 20 is an automatic success, then the wizard can just rip a steel door off its hinges by rolling a 20. Because I guess those people are bad dungeon masters, like they are incompetent at dungeon mastering and don't understand that players shouldn't be rolling for things that are impossible? And I had just kind of assumed that was common knowledge, but I guess some people just don't understand that the dungeon master has autonomy. And interestingly though, what has been added to the D20 test entry is the DM determines whether a D20 test is warranted in any given circumstance. So now you're having me and the wizards both telling you that as a dungeon master, you are supposed to use judgment. And yes, I am 100% confident that that was added as a response to people not understanding that concept. Also, the inspiration gained from rolling a 20 is also gone, a thing that people seemed pretty happy about on Twitter, but it has been replaced with now gaining inspiration on a roll of 1, which personally I think is worse. It's a reward for rolling a 1, and like, unless rolling a 1 is meaningfully worse than rolling a 2, that feels really unnecessary. Honestly, I just kind of think they really want inspiration to be a more commonly used thing, but don't know how to implement it. Hello, me from the future. So I did not notice this until after I recorded the video, but the heroic inspiration does specify that you decide to use it after rolling the D20. Unlike the player's handbook, which somewhat implies that the choice is made before rolling, or the previous playtest packet, which specifically states that the choice is made before rolling. And that's fine on its own, not really a big deal, but making the inspiration more powerful, combined with making them more common, makes it feel a little overpowered, especially combined with what I said previously about not liking the idea of it being a reward for rolling a 1. And another interesting thing is they have added more types of actions. The ones worth mentioning being like the study action, the influence action, and the search action, which are basically just groups of skills by general application. And like the class groups, this is a thing I like because it allows them to do more things using those groups. So, for example, you could have some kind of ability that grants you a bonus to the search action, which would then give you that bonus on the relevant applications of the insight, medicine, perception, and survival skills. It is just an overall interesting way to define similar usages of different skills, and then, mechanically use those definitions. And then, as I said, there's a bunch of little stuff like armor proficiency now being called armor training, or a bunch of things being reworded to more prominently use the term ability check. But honestly, here's the thing, I just don't have the encyclopedic knowledge of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition rules to be able to spot every little change that was made. So one last thing I would like to point out, because I'm kind of setting myself up for a thing here that I was going off on in the Bard and the Rogue video. The short sword has been reclassified as a simple weapon, which in itself is, not a big deal. But it makes me question, has anything else been reclassified? Because here's the thing, the reason that it was mentioned that the short sword was reclassified as a simple weapon is because the Bard lost their proficiency in the short sword, but still has proficiency in simple weapons, and gets a short sword in their starting equipment. So they had to say that a short sword is a simple weapon, or it would cause a rules conflict with, the Bard's starting equipment and weapon proficiencies. But here's the thing, is the Bard and the Rogue both lost proficiency in the hand crossbow, and it's entirely possible that the hand crossbow has also been reclassified as a simple weapon in, the version of the rules that we don't have access to. Because overall, the problem with this playtest is that it's not saying, here is an overall change to the rules. It is saying, here is one effect of an overall change to the rules that we know about, but you don't. And that just seems like a really good way to make sure that you are not going to get good feedback. So overall, this was just a weird playtest packet. Like the character origins, there was a really inconsistent level of redesign. Like, the Bard was stripped and rebuilt kinda poorly, the Ranger was stripped and not really rebuilt, and then the Rogue was just kinda barely touched. And then all the rest of the stuff seems more or less fine. It just kind of feels like either someone over there knows what they're doing and someone else does not, or there's just like no communication between any of the designers in terms of what direction they are supposed to be going with in this redesign. Because it really does feel like the Bard and the Ranger, as aggressive and slapdash as the redesign was, were going in a specific direction that the Rogue was not. And yes, there are hundreds of scenarios about how corporate mismanagement and or battles of fragile ego could lead to all these problems, and I'm sure somewhere in one of those is the truth of what's actually going on, but honestly, I don't care, because the only thing that actually matters is the end result that shows up on the page. And that end result is so far, unimpressive at best. But that is all I have to say on the topic of the One D&D Dungeon and Dragon Expert Classes playtest packet. And hopefully just, Dungeon and Dragon in general, until such time as the Wizards just, drop another playtest packet unannounced and I have to do this whole thing again. So until then, thank you for watching. Extra special thanks to my Fight and Flail Snails, Samuel Gorski, Randy Mulholland, and Toshiro Kuro. If you would like to be cool like them, you can check out my Patreon, where you can get early access to videos and fun stuff that I make for the Patreon. But if you don't want to do that, that's cool too. You can still hit all of the lovely buttons, like, subscribe, these other videos, which I am sure are lovely videos that you will also enjoy. And I will see you next time, with not Dungeon and Dragon. I do other stuff. I do lots of other stuff on this channel. You should check that stuff out if you haven't. It's cool stuff.